We have everybody on mute, so hopefully that.
If you can hear me, then we'll just go with that and assume everybody else can hear me as well. Just in a double check there. I'm a little bit new to Zoom, so if you'll bear with me for a second here, I will share my screen and see if this okay. And I'm just bringing this up as a PDF, as a kind of a foolproof way to get me through this. So if that works for everyone, I will go ahead and continue on. I appreciate the opportunity to be able to talk with everyone. And I think the original idea was that I would be here to do a legislative update for you. And that didn't quite work out, but I do have some good information for you. Spoiler alert. There was not a lot in the 2020 session related to big project work for transportation, but I do have a lot of, I think, good information for you today, and then let you know what's going on with us in terms of the pandemic and how we're proceeding with our work. So I started thinking back a little bit to when session ended, and that was on Thursday, March 12th. There were a lot of things going on at that time. In Utah, we were just starting to see our first cases of COVID-19. And actually the day before session finished was when Rudy Gobert was announced as a positive, as well as Tom Hanks and his wife. And so we all started to think that this was something we really needed to take seriously. By the time we got to the day after session finishing, we had schools were on a soft closure for 2 weeks. And so we all know what started to happen after that. And within UDOT, we started on the following Monday after session finished, we started a group meeting for emergency operations related to COVID-19. We had that group together so that we could understand what we needed to know to help keep transportation moving, help inform our employees, help our employees be safe, and try to figure out how we were going to do work. At that point, we were still plowing snow, still trying to keep our projects moving, and we've done that continuously since that time. So we started that up on Monday, and by Wednesday, our emergency operations group was not only dealing with a pandemic, but also with an earthquake. So I'm pretty proud of how our agency reacted in handling 2 emergencies and getting everyone stepped up and working on things to try to keep everybody moving in the state of Utah. I'm pretty proud of the work everyone did to try to keep things going. So there was a lot going on at that time, and so things that happened with the legislative session kind of, I think, seemed to pale in comparison to everything else we were dealing with. But now what I would like to do is just show you what's been happening for us in Utah for transportation since the pandemic started. And let me just go to a graphic here of what's going on with traffic. And this graph shows in relation 2020 traffic in relation to 2019. And you can see that starting in January of 2020 on the left, the blue line is showing the percent of traffic related to 2019. And you can see that we were trending higher traffic volumes across the state on average than we had in 2019. And then you see where we took the big dip, and we got down to about 60% of the traffic on all of our roads. And then you see that slowly creep its way back up again to the point that we are now in July. We're at about 90 to 95% of the traffic back on our roadways compared to 2019. So we're still a little bit lower than we were. Let me talk about some of the immediate impacts of that traffic being down. And I'll switch to another slide here for a little bit, and then I will go back again. But UDOT's funding, we have about a $1.5 billion budget. And if you look at the breakdown of that budget, you look at about 50% of that is in what we call the Transportation Investment Fund. That's about $750 million, and that's generated from sales tax. Transportation Fund is 400 million, and that is all generated from gas tax, and that's constitutionally protected for use for transportation. And then we have another 300 million in our highway federal funds. So I'll just go back to this graph again. And if $400 million is generated exclusively from gas tax, what does that mean when the travel is down as much as it was? So our budget year is July to July. And what we were seeing prior to the pandemic is we were seeing a trend of higher traffic than we had seen the year before. So our gas tax that was actually coming in was a little bit higher than we had anticipated. So then we hit a drop, and now making its way back up again. What that ultimately means for the fiscal year 2020, which ended on July 1, is that we had slightly less gas tax collected in that time. So what do we do with gas tax? That is mainly used for our operations, for our maintenance work, and our preserving our pavements. That, along with our federal highway funds, that's used really to run the organization, take care of everything that we've got. It does signal projects, it pays for our guys to plow snow, it takes care of all of that. So gas tax was slightly, what we collected will be slightly down, but we'll be able to manage that. We've got certain projects that are funded with that money, smaller projects, and we'll be able to limit our advertising of those at the end of the year as we need to in order to make that work. So projecting into fiscal 21, the next year, we are projecting that we will be slightly down in gas tax again, but we've already programmed our funds, and what we'll be doing is actively watching as the money comes in from gas tax every month, comparing that to the money that we'll be spending to advertise projects. And if we need to hold something as we get closer to the end, doesn't mean we're planning to cancel projects, but we may need to slow them down when we get closer to the end of that fiscal year, which would be in June of 2021. So we'll be keeping a really close eye on that and watching the revenues as they come in, and then matching up how we advertise our projects in relation to that. And we'll be able to manage it that way. So now the Transportation Investment Fund, which is $750 million, that is from sales tax. So sales tax is a little bit different animal. It's maybe not going to follow exactly the trends that the gas tax does, but let me just switch to this. One of the things that we could suggest in terms of how our economy behaves might be related to tourism, as that's an important part of the economy for our state. And this is just, informationally shows you what happened with traffic in the area of Moab, and starts to show you that in terms of tourism, yes, everything was down. Arches was closed down, and you can see what the darker line is showing you what the travel patterns were in 2019. And so when you see what happened in 2020, and yes, there is a big dip, but it has come back up again. It's not quite where it was, but it's very close to being back where it was. And let me just show you this one. This gives you a sense of what was going on for Zion. Similar look as the national parks closed down, as businesses closed down. There was not as much traffic generated in those areas, but again, we have seen that rebound fairly quickly. Now, that's not the only indicator of the economy, and so what we look to is a document called Utah Leads Together. And there have been multiple versions of this, and each one kind of building on the other. And really, this is what we look to in terms of thinking about economic recovery, how it relates to transportation. And this is a document that was done with the governor's office in conjunction with legislative leadership for a comprehensive plan for our state. Now, so what does this mean for transportation? Now, I've just clipped out a section of it, and it's a little bit blurry there, but you can read that: transportation, water, and life quality. And they say construction-ready investments, bonding for new highways, transit, active transportation, outdoor recreation, water infrastructure, and broadband. And the proposal is to explore various bonding scenarios for accelerating construction of valued transportation and life quality infrastructure to boost the Utah economy. So that's kind of a mouthful, but let me pick this apart a little bit. We want to make sure we're doing valued transportation, and we want to make sure that it is affecting quality of life. And I will go a little bit deeper into quality of life, and you may say, well, what does that have to do with you as a Department of Transportation? What does that have to do with transportation? So let me talk to you just a little bit about an effort that we have gone through in the last couple of years, a bit related to my position in the department. It is a new position since 2018 session, and really related to thinking about how we spend our money and how on projects and how it relates to what we want to do as a state. We gathered together multiple agencies. We gathered together groups representing different facets of transportation. We had all of our metropolitan planning organizations. We had UTA involved, we had Bike Utah, we had health department involved, really trying to look at what ways can transportation affect people's life in the state, and what do we all want as a goal. After multiple meetings, multiple conversations, multiple brainstorming sessions, trying to figure out what would be kind of our guiding principles for what we wanted as a state and how does transportation fit into it, what we came up with is what we all want is to make the quality of life in Utah better. And how do we do that? So our framework we created for how transportation helps with the quality of life is in these 4 categories. And that's in mobility, health, economy, and connected communities. So those are our 4 pieces of framework that help us get to quality of life with how we invest in transportation. And it was suggested in legislation in 2018 is that we develop this vision for what transportation should do in the state, and then we use that to help inform how we prioritize projects. So we took these 4 pieces of framework and we developed that into a model for how we think about transportation. And so we have additional categories under each one of these pieces of framework that helps us define how we would prioritize projects. So under good health, safety is the #1 goal for UDOT. And that is something very important to us. And so this is a big part of the category of good health. But we also have concern about the public health and wellness and the natural environment. You can see under strong economy that we have concerns about making sure that we connect the right activities together, that's important for the economy, that we help keep transport costs down, that we're encouraging economic development. And so we've got all of these categories, and we have built a prioritization process with respect to that. Now, also with our prioritization of projects, we have the long-range plan, which is our planning process for 30 years out for our state. And we work on this together with the metropolitan planning organizations and all of the transportation agencies together, trying to figure out what is it we need for the next 30 years for our state for transportation. Now that can change a little bit. We don't know exactly how the long-term effects of the pandemic on how we travel in our state. We know it's got some short-term effects. We're not quite sure how it affects us long-term, so that's something we need to keep an eye on. But we also know that multimodal systems are very important for us as a state. That's going to continue to be important. That interplay of highway and transit and active transportation and land use is always going to be important for us. So then we take that 30-year plan and it's broken into 10-year increments. So we have the projects that we need and that we can fund in that first 10 years. So we take that first 10 years of projects and apply a prioritization process to them. And I will give you kind of the short version of this, ta-da, and then we produce a list of projects that are ranked that helps us inform our Transportation Commission and helps them to make decisions about which projects should be funded. So we have, I've got a list shown here, and I know that I didn't intend for you to be able to read every project on it. What I'd like you to understand is this information is all available on our website. I put a link there, and you can't copy that down quickly enough, but I did send Amy a PDF of this presentation, and so hopefully she can get that out to everyone, and then you will have access to this. Another thing you can do is go to our website, udot.utah.gov. There is a search function there, and if you search for TIF Highway, that's our Transportation Investment Fund, TIF Highway, and it will lead you to the prioritization process, and then you can get to this document. So this document will show you in ranked order what we think are our priorities for us as a state. What are the most important projects for us to deliver in the next 10 years? So what you can see up on the screen is project 1 through 25. Now, we didn't fund anything off of this process for highways in our last funding session with our commission in April, but we have this list now, and I think it gives everybody something to look at and see what are those next projects that are most important to the state if you want to get a look ahead and figure out what you think is coming up next. This list is a great place for you to start. So that's on the website. You have access to that, and should be helpful to you. So as I said, this is about multimodal. This is not all about highways. So let's talk a little bit about what's been happening with active transportation since the pandemic. And if you look at the lines in blue here from Strava data, which we purchased Strava data to help us inform how we look at active transportation, and you can see the blue line, which is for 2020, and you can see how much what we see for bicycle ridership is up for 2020. And this is something we're finding across the board, is that active transportation, people being in the outdoors, trying to find different ways to recreate, has definitely gone up. Also have just another slide here that shows trail use. And this lists some trails that happen to be in the Utah County area. And you can look at the Provo River Trail, has more than doubled its usage in 2020 from what it had in 2019. Again, more than double the usage on Murdoch Canal Trail. And again on each one of these trail systems where they're doing regular counts. Now this one happens to be for May. So you see May of 2019 in blue, and you see May of 2020 in orange. So what we're seeing are trends across the board where we're seeing much more active transportation, that we have still are slightly down in our highway usage, but active transportation is up and seems to be staying up as people are finding new ways to recreate and new ways to get around. So that is very informative to us going forward, and starts to have us think about how we invest our money. And I will say that one of the changes we have had in the last year or so is the ability to actually fund active transportation projects from our transportation investment funding pool. And so while I said we did not fund major highway projects out of our TIF funding with our commission, we did fund 2 environmental documents. We funded Bangerter Highway Environmental and I-15 600 north of Farmington. We did fund both of those environmental documents so that we can have a jump on those projects that are high on that list that I showed you earlier. Also, what you see is this category called TIF Active. So these are active transportation projects that our Transportation Commission funded in May of this year. So you can start to see that we have an ability now to fund active transportation from TIF, and TIF has access to $750 million a year, and we can start to fund active transportation out of that fund. That's been an important move for us, an important change. And then we also have a funding source called Transit Transportation Investment Fund. It's got a much smaller amount of money in it, but we are also funding, as well as funding transit projects out of it, we are also able to fund what we call, which labeled there FMLM, that stands for First Mile, Last Mile. So that's trying to help with active transportation projects, getting you to say a front runner station or to a bus stop. It's very important how we get people in that last mile to those facilities to be able to use them. So this is another source of funding we have, and an important way that we can look at and prioritize projects for active transportation as well. So there's another trend that we've been seeing related to the pandemic. So I'll tell you just a little bit more, and then I'll stop and answer questions for you. But just in relation to UDOT's response to COVID-19, we spent quite a bit of time talking through our principles for how we deal with it. And I think these really, we started out with these for how we work with our employees. And I think these are really important things that we really believe in, and we want to be principles that guide us in how we do our business. So we want to show that we respect and care for our teammates, and that goes for our partners in the industry as well. That we need to take personal responsibility to lower our risk. We're taking personal responsibility, figuring out how to do virtual meetings, making sure that we are still effective in our business. We need to have our leaders all create a safe work environment. We also need to be flexible with our employees. They all have individual needs. We have some people who will still need to come to work because they are maintaining our facilities, and there's no way to maintain our roadways without being out on the road. But we're making sure that as they get in a truck or in a vehicle with another person, if they have to, that they're wearing a mask, that they've got the right cleaning procedures for their vehicles if someone else is going to be using it, that we've put measures in place that are going to protect all of our employees. We also want to make sure, this is really strong guiding principle for us, is that we want to serve the public in a way that instills confidence that the state is recovering and that the economy are recovering. But all this has to be balanced out with keeping everyone safe at the same time. And then what's become really important for us when we're doing so many virtual meetings is that we need to communicate frequently and clearly. And I'm sure that none of these are news to anyone, but I think these are important things for us. And I just thought I would share those with you because I think that the work that you guys do and try to understand an organization and write proposals to what the organization stands for, just trying to help you understand where we are with COVID response and what we stand for in relation to it is potentially helpful for you. So just my last slide that I have here is just in our response to people. So we talked about our guiding principles in terms of our response. Those guiding principles helped us create a workplace stabilization plan. So as I said, we've got a lot of different types of employees. Some are working in the field, and they still have been showing up to their work site per se every day, every working day, and they've been having to take different precautions, and they have different issues than the people who are now pushed into working from home. People working from home have issues of childcare or not having the right setup for them to be able to do their work. So we've had to work through a lot of things with over 1,700 employees and such a range of type of work they do, which the guiding principles have really helped us with that. And then just lastly, end with how we've engaged with the community and with the public is important as well. We are using a new tool now, publicinput.com, as a way to gather our public comments. And we also have been doing a lot more virtual meetings, and we've gotten a lot more comments that way than we ever have in the past. And so I think that's certainly a tool that we're going to be using going forward, certainly a lot more convenient for certain segments of the population. But at the same time, we are also trying to, even in the middle of all these concerns, we're trying to provide safe ways if you happen to be a member of the public who doesn't have access to the internet or a computer. With libraries closed down, there wasn't necessarily a way for the public to be able to access those tools. So we still are providing ways that the public can safely interact with our team members as they need to get the information that they need to have about how we're delivering transportation. So with that, I kind of gave you the brief explanation of what we have going on, how we're reacting to COVID, And I think I forgot a bunch of stuff in there, but hopefully there will be some questions and I'll be able to weave in some more answers throughout. So.
Thank you, Teri.
Hi, Teri. This is Julie, and I'm helping moderate a little bit. And I see one question that has been asked by Nancy. I think this is a little motivated because this is the way she goes to work. When will Highway 89's expansion between Farmington and I-84 be completed?
I don't know off the top of my head. I think we're just barely starting into that, and I know that that's going to be at least a 2-season job to get that work completed. But that's something. I can double check on that and get an answer back to the group. If I'll maybe take a note on a couple questions if I don't have the complete answer, but I know that is at least a 2-season job.
All right, Amy, you have some questions also?
I do. Thank you, Teri, so much for all of that really great information. And I apologize, I didn't mention at the beginning the format. If any of the attendees have questions, please go ahead and type them in the Q&A box or the chat box, and we will get those answered for you. So Teri, just a couple of questions related to proposals. Do you have any tips or tricks for the ARPLOC process? And specifically, what stands out to you as you're reviewing those, and what, like I said, tips do you have for consultants that submit for the ARPLOCs and also the streamlined RFQs?
So I will say I don't know that I have anything specific for those two methods, but I mentioned the quality of life effort that we were working on. I think that's an important thing for everybody to understand about UDOT is we are trying to work towards having everyone understand how what we does contributes to people's quality of life, and that's a subtlety. And it's not the same for every project, but think about how maybe how your company uniquely has the ability to bring that to a project, the holistic understanding of how the project can affect an individual in the end, and how you have the ability to bring that to it. And again, that's not the same for every project. And I think being familiar with the quality of life discussion and with the framework that goes along with it, I think those are elements of a proposal those are going to be important features of it, that somebody understands those subtleties of how to deliver a project.
That's great, thank you.
Teri, this is Julie. I see a couple here. At what point or phase does UDOT decide what kind of procurement, traditional versus alternative delivery, to use for future projects that will be constructed?
So I would say the larger the project, the more often we're going to be looking for an alternative form of delivery, whether that be a design build project or a CMGC project. Those types of projects where we think we can really benefit from the innovations that are going to come from private industry, and also depending on what the risks are on a job, that private industry may have a better way to handle those risks than we do, and having kind of a risk sharing ability there depending on how you put out the RFP. I think those are the types of projects, again, usually the larger projects, and we're usually trying to make those decisions fairly well ahead of time so that the industry understands what type of procurement we're going after. I know that people want to team well ahead of time on these projects, but I would say generally our larger projects are going to be considering options of design build or CMGC, or I'm at a loss at the moment. We are also using a new method on US 89, and I'm at a loss as for the title of it at the moment, but it's kind of, it falls somewhere in between a design build and the CMGC procurement. And so that's another type of delivery that we've been considering.
Is that progressive design build?
Yes,
you're
thank
referring
you.
to?
Thank you.
Okay.
When you're on the
So
spot,
when you
sometimes you
talk,
can't think of the right.
so you mentioned, the size of a project. Is that a dollar amount? Is complexity and location factored into that too? What
Yes,
does large a
absolutely.
project mean to you?
I would say when you start to get into the tens of millions, that is a project size that's usually got, and as you said perfectly, it's if it's got complexity to it, and we think that private sector has, is going to bring something to the table that we might not have thought of. We're not going to be using the alternative methods on, say, if we're going to do a paving job. Those are fairly straightforward. We've got a pretty fine-tuned process for advertising those projects and putting those out. Pretty reliable process there. But yes, more complexity to it. You get into the tens of millions of dollar project, and then some of the alternative delivery methods start to make a lot more sense. We do know that that when you're involved in one of those delivery methods, it is expensive to do the pursuits. And so we're not trying to use it on projects where we really don't need it, where they're small, they're very simple, straightforward projects. That's something that we can just do with our traditional design bid build process.
Thank you. Brianna and I both live downtown, and we've enjoyed the stay safe, stay active lane closures. What was the process for implementing that in Salt Lake City?
So I know that we have people within UDOT who worked with Salt Lake City on it. I don't believe that we have any state roads at this point that have been closed. And typically our state roads are going to be carrying higher volumes of traffic, and so those are a little bit more difficult to close. Also, as you saw the trend, we've had the traffic back up again. So we have not had any state roads at this point that we have actually closed, just because we have a tendency to have that more regional flow of traffic, and we've seen that coming back probably more quickly than some of the more localized traffic has.
Thank you. For some of us who follow more of the vertical funding that took place during the special session, Rick asks, I understand the legislature was expected to dip into transportation funding for other needs and replace it with more bonding capacity. Is that correct?
So they have not, so they have had, so there was there's some real specifics here that they had us finish all of our bonding ability, and go ahead and take out the bonds that we might have taken later, so that there was money available, but they have not asked for that money yet. And so that's something that we are still, there is, I just read this morning that they're planning for a special session August 20th. I don't know if they will address that at that point, but we have no specifics on whether there is going to be money specifically taken from transportation and moved into other areas right now. But again, we have the two sources of funding. We have the gas tax, which is constitutionally protected for transportation, and then we have the sales tax. And yes, the sales tax is something that the legislature could decide to move for other purposes. So that's, I guess, kind of a wait and see at this point. I think the other flip side of that is that there has been talk about trying to get the economy moving, and one way to do that is with infrastructure investment. So whether you would take from transportation to do buildings, there's all kinds of things that are going to have to be worked out, and I don't have any answers to those yet.
Thank you. Amber asks, can you tell us about Decision Lens and describe how it works and how we can write our streamline to capture the most important points? And is there a way to see this in action?
Decision Lens. My specific exposure to Decision Lens it's been a little while. And I guess that you're saying it's being used for our procurement currently. Is that where the question is getting at, and how we're using it?
Amber, would you like to clarify that a little bit in the chat for us? Yeah, she says yes.
So decision lens is really just a way to, they call it a pairing, it's a comparison that you use pairing. And I really think that the tool itself, I don't know that you need to write to the specific tool, because they should be taking the input that comes from proposals and using it to feed into decision lens, and it should just be helping them categorize the information and compare it. Not so much that I'm not familiar with that you would need to write specifically to how you would use decision lens. That's another thing I can follow up on. Not familiar with why you would need to write specifically to decision lens.
That's great. Thank you, Teri. And we'll get that information out to the membership and to Amber.
Another question about the Progressive Design Build project, and specifically US 89. Has it provided added value to the department? And is it expected additional projects will be delivered with the same delivery method?
So typically what we would do is do one project with it and make sure that we understand fully how it works. I think that from all I've heard, that the team has been happy with that method and that it has worked well. So I think that it will be a tool that we will continue using. And it's not the right tool for every project, just like I'm more familiar with how we've decided between design build and CMGC. And I think it really is dependent on the type of project you have. If it's a project where you want to sit down and have the conversation with the contractor and be a little more engaged in how the construction delivery moves forward specifically, where maybe you have big issues in communities and you don't have everything completely defined yet, where you might need to have more of that engagement as you go along, that might lend itself more to a CMGC or a progressive design build, where a design build, you need to have everything clarified fairly well up front in order to use the tool. But I think both of them is really based on the type of risks you have and the type of issues you have and how much flexibility you need going forward for the owner to adjust the expectations or the needs as you go along. And if the owner does need to adjust some things as design is developed, then it might lend itself a little bit more to progressive design build or CMGC.
Thank you. You did mention a little bit about the website and all the information that is available on UDOT's webpage. How do we find detailed information on projects on the approved list that you showed earlier? Is that something that could be found on the website?
So right now the list is, when you say, so you called it approved projects, it is a list of ranked projects that have not yet been funded. So there's not, I would say there's probably not a great deal of information on the website about them yet because they haven't been funded. I think that's, I believe within our prioritization process, you can find some of the details of why they scored the way they did, but in terms of having a lot more detail to the projects, we don't have that yet. But that's something that as we have some projects, we develop what we call a one sheet or a fact sheet. And we will sometimes develop those ahead of time. And as we develop those, we will make those available on the website, but we don't have a series of those right now for all of those projects that are listed.
You may have mentioned this and touched on it when you talked about a special session in August, but Darlene asked if the legislature is going to be reevaluating your budget and project list and funding in the coming months.
So the way our funding process works in terms of funding projects, it's a role of our Transportation Commission. So of course the legislature can earmark. And so if they earmark, that's one method for deciding on projects, but what they have asked us, they have specifically asked us to develop a prioritization process so that our commission can look at the ranked list and then decide what to fund from there. So I think that's been their leaning in the past few years, is to really have us rely on that ranked list we've created, which the ranked list is what I showed you. So, but yes, there could be some adjustment to our funding that happens, and that would be the $750 million category I said for the Transportation Investment Fund. That is something the legislature could decide. They could decide to lower that amount, raise that amount, bond based on that amount. There's lots of scenarios that they could do, which would change our ability to deliver projects. I would say currently we have a program of funded projects into 2025. So we don't have a lot of available funding. And if they decided to lessen the amount of money there, we would have to stretch those projects out further in time before we would start to fund other projects. So there's a lot that could happen. And I think there's not a lot of answers right now. It wasn't as if during, during the regular session and even the first special session they did, there was not any earmarking of projects that they said, hey, proceed with this. And I think that shows that they're trying to show a level of support for the ranking process that we've developed, and leaving that to our commission to decide which projects are the next ones to be funded. So I don't know if that ends. I kind of talked a lot there, and I'm not sure if I fully answered your question.
I think you may have. Can you talk a little bit more about the commission? How often do they meet? Who serves on that commission? How is that commission composed?
So we have our Transportation Commission. Their responsibility is to fund the projects. So the department will make recommendations to the commission, and then the commission gets familiar with the projects, and then they're the ones who they actually take a vote and approve the projects for funding. Our commission meets once a month typically, except for the month of July. They prior to the pandemic, they traveled throughout the state and would hold meetings in different parts of the state in order to be able to get input from local officials and be able to do tours so that they could get familiar with some of the needs for transportation across the state. Currently, we're doing those meetings virtual. So all of our meetings are available through YouTube, and they have been for quite some time, but our meetings are completely virtual right now. And we take public comment prior to the meeting, read the comments during the meeting. If someone wants to comment directly to our commission, they can do that during the meeting as well. We've got mechanisms on the website for people to be able to comment to our commissioners, much like they would in a regular public meeting. And we see those continuing for the next little while here until we're out of until we start to see our numbers coming back down again, and we think that it's safe to gather a group of people together. But we do have 7 commissioners, and the commissioners are, I believe at this point, they are recommended by the governor, and then they are approved by the Senate, I believe is the mechanism. And we have commissioners from across the state. You're going to test me here and see if I can get all of them for you. I would cheat and not go. The website, they're all listed, and you can read some bios on them. We have 4 commissioners that are listed by region, that they represent a region of the state. We have 4 regions within the state, 1, 2, 3, 4. That's real original naming for them. Region 1 is the northernmost region, and that is Commissioner Wayne Barlow. We have Region 2 is Commissioner Natalie Gochner. Region 3 has Commissioner Jim Evans. Region 4 is Commissioner Nagi Zanotti, who is also our chair. And then we have 3 at-large commissioners who represent across the state. And we have former Senator Kevin Van Tassel out of Vernal. We have this is where I'm going to slip up because the at-large, I can't do it by location. We have Donna Law, who lives in Cedar City. And I've got Lou Kramer, who lives in downtown Salt Lake and represents kind of the commercial real estate area. So we have those 7 commissioners, and we have meetings that usually last 2 to 3 hours once a month, and we present lots of information to them. And then usually a lot of our work culminates in March and April, when we have what we call our programming workshops, and we put lots of projects in front of them and try to explain every nuance of our programs to them. And then they end up voting on projects for funding. And then throughout the year, each month, there'll be potentially changes to that funding, and they will make recommendations on changes to funding as projects progress. So that's kind of the big highlights of our Transportation Commission.
That's really helpful. Thank you. And good job on remembering all those names. Another question, how do UDOT and UTA interface on the development of track stations? And are there any upcoming track station projects?
So I'd say we call ourselves kind of partner agencies, partners in transportation, because you've got to have that holistic multimodal look at how we deliver transportation. But when it comes to the specific funding and delivery, it used to be that it was completely separate, and now we've kind of blurred the lines a little bit, the funding for UDOT and UTA being separate. Right now, with the creation of the Transit Transportation Investment Fund, that created a small but increasing amount of money that the UDOT Transportation Commission actually programs the funds. And so when I showed you that list previously, there were probably 4 or 5 transit projects that the commission proposed, that we proposed funding on. The commission approved that funding at their meeting in May. Typically UTA would be responsible for construction of projects, but we do have some examples. For instance, the Front Runner Station in Vineyard is being managed in partnership with UTA, but that project is being led by UDOT. So and that's because it has state funding, and we decide when there is state funding on a project, then we'll work with UTA and decide who's the best one to manage this project. In terms of new track stations, I am not aware of new stations on the existing line, but I'm not as probably in tune to all the specific light rail projects that are going on. I know there are additional light rail projects being studied, and you can also find those in the long range plan, find out which projects are being looked at for the next 10 years projects. And I can't give you a full answer on everything going on with transit, but that's kind of the high level. And I would say we definitely work in coordination, collaboration, partnership, all good words to describe how we work with UTA.
All right, another question just popped up. Is there a list available for the smaller pool projects that have been funded, or is there a prioritization list for these?
So what I showed in the presentation, I had there were the active transportation projects, and so it gets somewhat confusing here, but just remember there is TIF, which is used to fund highway and active transportation, and the commission did fund 2 environmental documents and funded a handful of active transportation projects that I'd say are kind of on that smaller scale. And then with TTIF, which is the Transit Transportation Investment Fund, there were multiple transit projects funded, as well as some first mile, last mile. Those are available on our website. And it's a bit, I would say it's not streamlined how you get to those projects right now. But if you go to our website, scroll all the way down to Transportation Commission, and then go to prioritization process, you can link to those projects. And that's something that maybe I can give all the additional links to the sheets if that's going to be helpful. I didn't include a lot of links in the presentation, but I could get you the links for each one of those spreadsheets if that's something that's helpful for those categories that we funded projects in the May commission meeting. So there'll be the 2 lists of small projects that were funded, and then the other list I showed you again are highway ranked projects that have not been funded yet. But if you're trying to anticipate what's coming up to be funded, that list is a good place to get familiar.
Teri, I'll have you send that
Thank
to
you.
us, and then we'll post
Okay.
it on the website.
Okay, great. I'll get those as soon as we finish. I can get those out. You guys can have those.
Yeah, thank you.
And certainly, I can give my my email address if people have follow-up questions and want to ask or clarify where to find stuff.
Okay, thank you for that. So we're just getting close to the end of the webinar. Just one last call for any further questions for Teri. Doesn't look like we have any, and most of the other questions that I had have already been answered. So thank you, Teri. Just really appreciate your time today. Really good information. I know there's a lot going on with UDOT and just COVID and funding, and it's been really useful to have you come and speak to that and give us an update on what's going on. So thank you so much. And again, we'll get this presentation posted and links sent out to everybody or posted on our website. So with that, I think we will go ahead and end the webinar. And again, thank you, Teri.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.